Welcome to our first open conversation series. Tonight we're going to talk about food. This is like a very California thing to do. We love a restaurant recommendation, an under-the-radar taqueria, a farm tour. But what we're going to talk about tonight is a sort of less known portion of the food system, which is food waste. It's huge. It's 30 to 40% of food grown in the United States is discarded before it's eaten. And that has very meaningful impacts for our climate. According to the United Nations, 8% of our climate emissions are due to wasted food. With a growing population and increasing climate impacts from other sources, it's critical that we use our food resources more efficiently. So this is a massive problem, but it's also a problem we share. We're all in this together, we all eat, and that's why we picked this topic for our first Open Questions program. Food waste is has all the hallmarks of a classic wicked problem. It's a global issue, there's no single solution. It's also very overwhelming to talk about, so it's very easy to click away from a news story about this topic and just sort of want to ignore the issues. But that is why tonight's program is such a fun opportunity for all of us. We have the opportunity to pause, really dig into this issue, and learn more about solutions from the people who are developing them. And then here in the Bay Area and in California, we're particularly lucky. We're at a hub of innovation of many things, but food is one of them. So we're poised to become leaders on this issue nationally and globally. Our Open Question series is a collaboration between, as Sam mentioned, the Exploratorium and one of our most dynamic thought partners, the Grand Challenges program at the University of California, Davis. They bring together researchers and thinkers from a variety of disciplines to work on problems just like this. So tonight we'll be hearing from 4 researchers and innovators who are working on different ways to reduce or repurpose food waste. I'll be joined on stage by Professor Ned Spang, director of the Robert Mondavi Institute for Food and Wine Science at UC Davis. He'll give us a short overview of food waste in the US and globally. And then we'll jump into some introductions and a conversation with Dr. Ruihong Zhang, professor of biological and agricultural engineering, Dr. Zane Stark, co-founder of Optimized Foods, and Dan Kurzrock, founder and CEO of Upcycled Foods. And we'll hear some remarks and then dive into a conversation on all kinds of things, including suggestions from you, the audience. So as Sam said, as you have a question, write it down, pass it to the end of the aisle, and we'll do our best to incorporate some of them into the conversation tonight. So without further ado, please welcome our panelists to the stage. So Ned, would you like to kick us off with your overview of food waste and the bioeconomy?
I'd be happy to. Thanks for having me tonight. It's great to see so many faces in the crowd. This is really exciting to talk about these topics and to spend some time here at the Exploratorium, so I really appreciate it. So I put some slides together just to get us all on the same page with this topic. It's a big topic, thinking about bioeconomy and food waste, so I wanted to run us through a few sort of examples of how we can think about this issue. So what is the bioeconomy? How many people have heard of the term bioeconomy before? All right, so people are familiar with it. All right, just to set a few principles here on what we are talking about with the bioeconomy, and there's a lot more to it, but just a few rules for tonight that can help us, is that we want to think about sustainable biomass production and sourcing, so that we're getting materials, we're growing them in a sustainable way, and we can have that as a resource. We also start to make sure that we're using, developing, and innovating in the space of developing bio-based products and bioenergy. Another thing we want to think about is the circulation of material and nutrients. That's the nice part about a bio-based economy, is that those nutrients should be able to go back into the agricultural system to make more products, more energy. So when we think about applying this concept to food systems, we want to think about the food supply chain as an opportunity to circulate some of that material. So on this kind of complicated picture behind me, you don't have to read all the components to it, but what it's basically showing is that we are trying to take some of the material that comes out of our food system. This can be as simple as a banana peel that you might throw away. There's still nutrients in that banana peel. How do we utilize that? Can we recycle that into bioenergy? Can we recycle that into nutrients back into the soil? What we don't want to do is put it in a landfill where it ultimately will just degrade into methane and create a greenhouse gas. This will allow us to reduce waste, and it also allows us to reduce the overall environmental impact of food systems. If we're circulating more of this material, it means we're using less fertilizer, using hopefully less fossil energy. So we start to create these loops, and it can go back, it's like recovering food and donating it. That's an example of circularity. Or we might make a new ingredient that we put back into food systems with some transformation. You'll hear that from some of my colleagues. Or we're just putting it back into the soil, as I said before. So how big is this issue of food loss and waste? How many people think about food loss and waste? Is this a common thing that you guys, all right, this is the right crowd. All right. Well, you don't have to hear it from me, but I'll still go through the statistics. About a third of all the food we produce on the planet is lost or wasted, which is really a staggering number. And this represents over $1 trillion in economic value and even higher potential environmental and social costs when we think about the loss of all this food. Represents about 8 to 10% of global greenhouse gases. And meanwhile, 30% of our population is food insecure. So there's a real imbalance here. We're producing some food over here and it's being wasted. Well, there's other people that need that food, they need those nutrients. So how do we start to connect those dots? How do we be innovative and solve two problems at once? Well, the UN has responded to this challenge when they first saw the FAO report that mentioned that 1/3 of food wasted globally. They set a Sustainable Development Goal 12.3 to reduce food loss and waste by 50% by 2030. So that really called to action. A lot of nations have now adopted that target, the US included. It's a shared goal by the EPA, the FDA, and the USDA. And this would actually mean reducing our per capita food waste to 164 pounds per year per person, reducing it to 164 pounds per person per year. So we're double that right now, which is really hard to imagine if you think about it. So this is something I want you guys to consider tonight. What is even the role you can play in reducing food loss and waste as you engage with food systems? So what do we do about this? When the numbers are so big, it can be sort of a daunting challenge, but on the other side, it represents a huge opportunity. So where are the solutions? There's solutions across a spectrum. If we really want to focus on the greenhouse gases, maybe we'll focus at the end of this opportunity, which is to avoid sending things down to the landfill or down the drain, because there's really no productive value there. However, if we want to capture some of those nutrients or bioenergy, we might consider technologies like compost or anaerobic digestion. But even better is to keep that material in the food system. We can do that by redirecting some biomaterial to feed animals. We can do that by donating the food, and we can do it by upcycling food, which we will, again, talk about later in the panel. But the number one best solution always for food loss and waste is to not lose or waste it in the first place. That is its desired destination. It's generally its highest market value. So solutions that really lead to prevention are often the best ones to start with. And we have opportunities here to develop technologies, new business models, new policies, and consumer education, which I think is an incredibly important piece of the puzzle. So how do I, as a researcher, look at this issue? Well, I sit and I chat with folks like you, so thanks again for coming. But in my research, in my lab, there's a couple approaches I just want to share with you that we're looking at. One is we don't really know much about this material. If you think of something as low waste, you don't tend to measure it or monitor it. It's kind of out of sight, out of mind when you throw it in the wastebasket or you push it out the back door to factory. Well, we want to know what that material is. How much is available? What's the biochemical characterization, meaning what are the important molecules that are in that material that might be worth extracting and creating a new revenue stream? So we have a new opportunity on campus using some of the tools we've developed for artificial intelligence for food systems to scrape a lot of this information from the academic literature and put it into a database for the first time. So all of a sudden, we can see how much tomato skin and tomato seeds are left over when we can tomatoes. Okay, how much lycopene, an important an invaluable compound, is in that material that we could potentially recover? And what is the economic value of that material? We're hoping to put all that information together so that innovators and companies can start to see this information and develop their solutions more easily. Another solution we're looking at is thinking about anaerobic digestion, and Dr. Jang is an expert in this area as well. I'm looking at it from a more regional sustainability issue. If we're going to deploy this technology, what size should the technology be? Should it be a big centralized anaerobic digestion facility outside of the city? Or can we start to bring some of this technology into the city in smaller modular systems? If we do that, we might reduce hauling costs. It might be easier to access this technology. The other thing we have to think about is it's great to get the bioenergy when we do anaerobic digestion. So this is basically breaking material down in a controlled environment where we capture the bioenergy, but it's still producing nutrients that should be used in a productive way. So we're also doing studies to look at how applying this material on tomato plants, for example, are affecting the growth of tomato plants. if we don't demonstrate that this is valuable to growers, they're not going to adopt this as a potential nutrient source. So as a university, we play an important role in sort of de-risking some of these ideas, saying, hey, look, there might be an opportunity here. We might do some of the research ourselves and spin out a company as we've done in the past, or we might just pass out the information to society so that we can develop policies or technologies and spur that change in society. So these are the ways I look at this issue. These are two particular projects that I'm excited about in the food loss and waste space. And I'll turn it over to my colleagues to add to the discussion. Oh, first I want to thank all the folks I work with, including my lab and funders, of course, very important.
Good evening. Hi. Very much honor for me to be here. And so I'm Rui-Hong Zhang. I'm here also at UC Davis. I wanted to kind of continue the discussion about the food waste. So food waste is very personal because we do have food scraps or food leftovers. If you have any leftovers from lunch, then you can, if you don't eat, and then put in the trash and throw away. So my job has been, and I'm still doing the job, is to develop technologies that take the food scraps, food waste, and convert them into valuable products. So in the end, zero waste. That's where we wanted to get to, zero waste. So let me see. Basically take these materials and food waste or agricultural byproducts, and so then put it through conversion process. Then on the other side, we generate energy and even produce a food that is edible, so transform non-edible into edible food. Or we also produce a material that can feed the animals with the more nutritious components. And also, not just mentioned about fertilizers, and also I have been working on bioplastics, making polymers that can be used to produce biodegradable plastics, so we don't have non-biodegradable and materials. And a part of my research has been to really use the powerhouse of microbes, different types of microbes, to do wonderful things. And on the slide, there are 4 types of colors, right? So, right. And they're just the miracle. And so if you feed them the material we throw away, we don't want to eat, and you feed them to the microbes, so they produce and food or feed or fuel, and so energy. So the one from the left, the fungi for food. So that is the Aspergillus oryzae. And so if we feed some food waste, and then they produce a fungi, which we can harvest for that's high protein and nutritious food. And so we developed technology that we can produce fungi safely. And so high protein, up to 40-50% protein, and very useful. And then the green one is algae, microalgae. And so we produce microalgae for animal feed and also high protein food as well. And then pink one is archaea. And so the organism microbes we use in the lab and to produce biopolymers. And they're very pretty. And the pink color is a pigment these organisms produce naturally. It's carotenoid. So we got the 2 products. One is about plastics. The other is a carotenoid. Has a lot of application. And then the last one, a bit darker. So those are the bacteria, microbes that produce hydrogen, methane. So we can convert food waste into energy. Okay. So, and what we do, we develop the processes and equipment and control the conditions, put these microbes into fermenters. So, and year-round, constant, and we just put the food waste in, and they will give us valuable products. And so just 2 examples. And the fungi. So what you see on the screen, those are edible fungi. And as fungal biomass, we have developed the process. We can produce these fungi in spherical balls and different colors, different nutrition profiles. And they are just ready to eat after we take them out. They're edible. And so, they have high protein, and also they can take up nutrients, encapsulate. And so it has a lot of functionality and for providing the food for a growing population. And so a second example is the anaerobic digestion. So anaerobic digestion is using mix of microbes to take the food waste to produce methane and hydrogen for energy production and also for fertilizer production. One of the technologies developed in my laboratory has been commercialized. And as our UC Davis has built a now operating biodigester we call UC Davis Renewable Energy Anaerobic Digester, is on campus taking all the food waste from campus and also from surrounding businesses like grocery stores. And then we convert, we produce some biogas for energy and produce fertilizers for farms or for greenhouse production. With that, I will stop. I'll be happy to, later continue with the conversation. Okay.
And I found out that the anaerobic digester was featured as a question on Jeopardy recently, which is one way to tell that you've made it.
Amazing. Thank you, Dr. Zhang. And hi, everybody. My name is Dan Kurzrock, and it is an honor to be on the stage with such esteemed individuals. I identify as a lowly entrepreneur, so I'm going to share a little bit about what we're doing commercially around bringing some of these principles of the circular economy into practice, focused on the food and beverage industry. So our company is called Upcycled Foods Incorporated. You heard a little bit about upcycling already. It's about taking this idea of identifying what would have conventionally been considered the end of one supply chain and reimagining it as the beginning of another. And this is a new term for a very, very old idea. I mean, I think it's important to contextualize that food waste is, first of all, a uniquely human problem, right? And it's also a relatively recent human problem that is the consequence of the ways in which our food system has industrialized and gotten more efficient in some ways, but more inefficient in others. And so as a company, we've become quite obsessed with this idea of finding where there's value that's being left off the table. Maybe it's going to the path of least resistance, a lower use, like Ned was sharing around feeding animals even, or land application, or God forbid landfill, way at the bottom. There's lots of uses above landfill, but with upcycling, what we're most interested in is putting food as often as possible to its highest and best use, feeding people. And so what we do as a business is identify those supply chain opportunities, we collect those dots, and then we try to connect them through to commercial applications that solve problems for food businesses. So we develop technology, actually our first technology platform, I just learned that we developed with Dr. Zhang's husband, actually, through the USDA, through a collaborative research and development agreement, very kind of creative partnership structure to develop technology to unlock the value of brewer's grain, which I'll talk a little bit about in a case study in a minute. But the whole purpose of the technology is really to unlock these ingredient opportunities, which we can then work with other food businesses on developing back into products. And then we support that effort with our innovation lab, where we've also begun starting to help other companies that are manufacturing products look at some of their own waste streams and try to help them unlock some circular opportunities internally. Anyone have beer tonight, maybe at After Dark? So beer is a product of the land. There's only 4 ingredients in beer making, and the largest one by volume is the grain, which is malt. It's typically made from barley that's been sprouted. This is actually a photo from 21st Amendment Brewery here in San Francisco. And I fell into this opportunity actually as an underage homebrewer many moons ago in my undergraduate, where I was making beer every week and just discovering that with each batch I was also using a tremendous amount of grain, and started asking what could be done with it, and also what was already being done with it. So I won't name this brewery on the right here, but it's also a San Francisco brewery that's only distributed in the state of California. And these dumpsters filled with grain represent 1 day of production from one brewery. In a city like San Francisco, we're only 7 miles by 7 miles here, right? There's more breweries than neighborhoods. There's more than 9,000 breweries operating in the US today. So there is just I usually use some coarse language here, so I won't actually. There's a ton of this material that is available, and it is constantly available. So you can't actually make beer without making this side stream. It is not food waste in the classic sense of, oh, if the brewery were just a little better, this wouldn't exist. It is a co-product of that process, or it should be considered to be a co-product of that process, and that's what we've sought to build a business around changing. So our first product, what we've done is built it's like a powder. It's not really a flour. It's a very nutritious powder that is mostly plant protein and dietary fiber. And I just bring up this slide because, I mean, like in an audience like this, I can talk about the real reason why I'm doing this, which is because I care about reducing food waste, right? But you don't want to yuck the yum of someone at a grocery store by telling them that they're eating some, material that would have otherwise been wasted. It's important, we've found, to tap into some existing need that we have as people. We want delicious food. We want nutritious food, right? So we have a customer that's making a keto-friendly bread. And the way that they're making that keto-friendly bread is because they're using our upcycled grain, right? So there's different aspects of this, the benefits of the bioeconomy that can be talked about in different ways to different audiences. If you can name it, we've probably regrained it. The name of this ingredient is Regrain Supergrain Plus. We've made almost any grain-based food that you can think of, and some that you wouldn't even otherwise consider to have grains in it necessarily. So this is a material that we found can be integrated into a wide variety of food products. And we've had some commercial executions. We're still a startup. We're scaling up now. But we've had Kroger stores under their Simple Truth brand, for example, launch a commercial bread, store-wide under their private label. And there's some other examples that if you look us up, or we can chat after, we can share. But actually here tonight, there's a lovely California-based bakery called Atorius that produces a multigrain naan using our ingredient in it, and it's just coming now off of an exclusive with Misfits Market, and it's going to be available through more retailers soon. So we're very excited about that. So this is one commercial example, but what I wanted to do with the last minute or so is just seed some other inspiration as to what other kinds of foods are being left off the table when we're talking about available opportunities for upcycling. Can anyone tell me what this is? Cashews. You guys are smart. So this is cashew, the cashew apple. Has anyone had a cashew apple? One, two, yeah, a handful, right? It's not very commonly consumed. It's got nutritional value. It's got great flavor. It very rarely leaves primarily Brazil and India, where cashews are primarily cultivated. This is an example of an agricultural side stream that represents an opportunity for product development for food companies. How about this? Cacao, right? In cacao, we make chocolate. Has anyone ever had cacao fruit? Love this audience. Yes, cacao fruit. It is delicious. It tastes nothing like chocolate. It has great functional value and nutritional value as well. Largely underutilized globally, and there's a cacao crisis going on right now too, which is a separate topic. How about here? Coffee. You guys are nailing it. So with the coffee, I like this example because this is where there could be 3 products, but we're currently just valuing the bean. So with coffee, there's the cherry, also known as cascara. Some of you may have had it in different beverage applications. And then there's also the coffee leaf, which almost no one in the global north, at least, has tasted. It can be an incredibly delicious tea that actually has more antioxidants than matcha, right? So there's real health benefits to these materials that we're just not valuing appropriately with business as usual. And so I've got probably 100 of these examples. Oh yeah, here's sake leaf, sake kasu. It's consumed in Japan. Sake is brewed all over the world. We don't do anything with it here. So, okay, sorry, I thought I was done with my examples. That's not a bit, actually. I actually thought I was done. this is tofu being produced, and the side stream from tofu is okara, which has a lot of fiber and nutritional value as well. So just, I think this is actually my last example, yes. Food for thought.
Thank you, Dan. Hard act to follow. But yeah, so my name is Zane Stark. I'm co-founder of a company, Optimize Foods. And Rehang showed that picture of those spherical, colorful spheres that you saw there. And I saw that a few years ago, and I'm like, oh, those are delicious. Those remind me of boba. I want to eat those. And I said, oh, where can I buy those? And she said, well, you have to launch a company and commercialize it first. And I'm like, wow, that's been a number of years and a lot of investment. But what does it take to actually translate a technology from a lab so it can actually have an impact in the world is a really exciting space. And I think that's where, I'm really excited to be a part of commercializing this technology. So Optimize Foods is taking agri-food waste from processing facilities using mycelium, fungi, things that have been transforming our food systems for thousands of years, from beer to wine and cheese. Using that same approach, we use koji, which is a Japanese strain, as Rehang mentioned, and converting that into delicious, nutritious foods. But there's an important step that we do in that middle of that process. We're using agri-food waste that contains really functional, nutritious compounds. And we want to encapsulate that and leverage the biology of the mycelium and the spherical mycelium technology that Rehang developed to actually incorporate that into the mycelium so it improves the health, improves the bioavailability, uses those complex carbohydrates, converts it into high-quality protein, high-quality fiber, and then make functional, delicious foods. So that's the fundamental platform technology, but the implications are vast and broad. So when we came to this, we said, well, where do we begin? How do we start? And we decided to launch caviar because it's like boba, but with a slightly fishy taste. But the reason why we went after caviar is it's the most expensive food in the world. It's actually nutritious and delicious for you, but it comes from sturgeon. And sturgeon are these amazing dinosaur-like fish, 200 million years old, just amazing genetics. They're the most critically endangered species group on the planet. 23 out of 27 species, something like that, are critically endangered, and the white sturgeon in Sacramento River and region are suffering from that as well. So when we thought about a food that can, one, come from agricultural byproducts, in this case we use almond hulls, that contain really healthy, delicious, nutritious polyphenols that can actually improve health. And now we combine it with some really great fats, omega-3s, and then launching that with top restaurants, top chefs, where they can be our advocates. They can be the ones educating about the future of food. And so this is a really exciting story. Not a lot of people are eating caviar on a regular basis, but we call it our tap-down approach, where if you go to the French Laundry and Thomas Keller is saying, hey, check out this new sustainable caviar that's actually protecting an entire species, that's going to work its way down. And then as we launch into other products. So again, this is a platform. Tomato pumice, we can use any agricultural byproduct, but we focus on ones that have these high-value secondary ingredients like polyphenols or lycopene or beta-carotene from carrot pumice, and start with that as the source because we want to encapsulate that and improve the delivery and the functional nutrition. So globally, over 3 million tons just goes directly to compost or landfill inefficient compost, contains this compound lycopene, very poor bioavailability. By encapsulating it with a mycelium, we can improve that bioavailability, improve the stability, and improve the functional health by delivering that as a functional food. So our first product beyond the caviar in terms of the broader market is we call it our high-fat product. It's a replacement for alternative meat product where we can deliver functional fats. We can encapsulate fats and nutrients and flavors. But do we really want to launch another alternative hamburger in California? Well, yes. But after that, we really want to think about the global implications and how do we actually functionally improve nutrition on a global level. This is a technology platform that can stabilize supply chain, and so we really think about what is the grand challenge. So we're partnering with a company in India. There's plenty of calories, actually. They can get all the calories they want. The problem is nutrition, and the stabilization of the supply chain. So by leveraging the spherical mycelium platform technology, we can encapsulate those nutrients from the supply chain, stabilize them, and now deliver them in a functional way. So we're looking at a number of different snacks, porridges, and different food products that we could potentially launch in India. But really, this is a global solution. When we think about food waste, the challenge with food waste is shipping. So we really think about localized manufacturing and where you put these, basically fermenters, kind of like brewing beer, but put them close to where that waste stream is, and create some functional, delicious, nutritious foods.
Wow, thank you so much, everyone. That was a wonderful overview. There's a lot of rich and exciting ideas in all of your projects, and it's hard to know where to start, but I thought I might begin with Ray Hong and talk a little bit more about the sort of technology, and Zane, you may want to comment on this too. So when we spoke about your work prior to the panel, you talked about it as the valorization of food waste, and of course valorization can mean adding value, but can also mean to sort of glorify or talk up something or someone. So do you feel like there's any misconceptions around the sort of the microbial processes that you're using or the way you're working with food waste that you'd want to clarify, or are there ways you'd want to valorize in the sense of like cheerleading this technology?
Thank you, Sarah. That is an excellent question. And especially if we wanted to produce fungi, for example, fungi in this case, and for other microbes for food application. And one of the first concerns people raise, and I hear is the safe. Are they safe, especially producing these microbes for food application from waste stream? Okay, so that's and to answer your question, and first we start for food application. We select the material that pretty safe, clean to start with. Then we control the processes and also have the microbes that are safe for people to consume or for animal consume. So safety is very important. And so certainly compliance with the regulations, and that's another thing. So, and we're able to, from techno speaking, we're able to address any concerns that could be raised. So make technology work and also produce a safe and sustainable food.
And Zane or Dan, you're also working with sort of reclaimed food. Do you feel like there's any sort of stigma around it that you've had to overcome, or do you feel like the public is really ready for to see just new ideas in this space?
Depends on where you are and what you know. I think this audience is quite ready, just even based on what we're experiencing so far. But language matters a lot, right? And so when we were getting going, we started testing language like reclaimed or repurposed or recycled, and we ultimately landed on upcycled, which has its own challenges around. We borrowed the word from like DIY crafts, where you take like old water bottles and make things out of them in the garden and things like that. But there's a real challenge in how you can effectively communicate the value, of this material for the planet, which has to do with reducing waste, but also, as I mentioned in my my intro, not yucking the yum, of anyone either. And what we've found is that in a business-to-business context, talking about the food, the food waste upcycling, reducing food loss, companies, something like 3/4 actually of the world's 250 biggest food companies have publicly committed to food waste reduction goals. something like 15% of those feel like they're on track to do it. So that's a kind of message that lands well with that type of stakeholder. But at the consumer level, we really encourage our customers to talk about flavor, to talk about nutrition, and oh, by the way, it's upcycled. I used to use Tesla as an example in this. It's become a more controversial example recently. But if you can imagine way back when they first launched, and people, were buying these vehicles, it wasn't because they were electric necessarily, right? It's because they were fast, beautiful cars to a certain, demographic. And that, that approach, I mean, there's some parallels, I think, to food where if you focus on flavor first, on nutritional value, on hitting a price point that can make sense, and oh, by the way, it's better for the planet, you can kind of use that altruistic, aspect of it as a reason for loyalty without relying on it as a reason for purchase. And I think that nuance took a long time to sort of develop for us, and is informing everything we're doing as we go forward.
That's really helpful. As a science writer, I feel like finding the right language to describe something that gets people excited about it is one of the foremost challenges. And we do quite a lot of testing at the Exploratorium, so it sounds like that was really integral to your process. I wanted to jump to Ned. So your work really is about capturing a sort of snapshot of food loss at various stages of the process of producing it. So, that sounds like almost like a large-scale systemic question. So are there policy innovations or industry innovations that you think are really important or really promising that we should be looking for or working towards?
Yeah, that's a great question. As I was saying in my slides, I think there's room for a lot of different movements from different actors in this space. On the policy side, here in California, we have a really aggressive and aspirational policy to divert 75% of our organic waste in landfills by next year, which is a lot, and we're not quite going to get there, but aspirational it is. So we have to think about, cities and counties have to think about how they're going to collect this material. What is the best siting and scale of compost systems and anaerobic digestion that we need to invest in to actually manage all this material? It's also educating, as I said before, the growers on how to use this material, because it might not be the fertilizers that they're used to using. And they aren't always willing to take on big risks with new technologies when, it's the crop really matters. So we have to, again, there's a role for us at UC Davis to do research and to use our extension programs to do that education. One interesting thing about that policy I want to share is there's that organic waste diversion goal, but what's unique to California's policy is that we also have a recover 20% of edible food built into that policy. So there was a recognition when writing that policy that we're trying to kind of move waste out of the landfill, but we're also trying to encourage people to think about, okay, how do I capture edible food and make sure that gets to a population that needs it? So we're trying to address two challenges at once, which can be a difficult policy question, but it's important. One other group I want to talk about is the entrepreneurs and the group of folks working in this area. Dan has played a major role in the Upcycled Food Association. So beyond his company, making sure that he's sharing what he's learning and bringing other, could be competitors, but it's really a collaborative space to get this movement going forward. And so there's been a lot of work done in that area just to educate consumers on these products. And the final piece I think is critical is working this into the education system, K through 12, university. This needs to be a topic that everyone is familiar with. It's a great way to educate on food systems, where your food's coming from, the relationship between food and the environment. And I think it's just an important thing that we can keep in mind and really should start to take on the type of campaigns that we've gone through before to reduce littering or to reduce smoking. I mean, we've had major changes in how people interact with different, products or approaches to things, and I think food waste needs to be the next best approach to really have a huge movement.
Yeah, it feels like there's a role for institutions like the Exploratorium on that as well, in terms of educating people about food waste and food systems. I have one more question I wanted to quickly jump to Zane, and then we have a couple audience questions, which will be fun. But Zane, it sounds like a lot of your work is really driven, and a lot of your previous projects you have been driven by collaborations with academia. So how does research come from the laboratory to your labs to the public? And so what are the advantages and what are the maybe friction points when working with an academic collaboration system?
Well, it's never easy, but it's often so important. And I think so UC Davis, University of California Davis, is a public land grant university, meaning that it's our mission to really help drive the future of change in California, but really the globe. And so when I think about, what it means to be an entrepreneur, translating, Ray Hong's research out of this that's been funded by California and federal taxpayers, it's really it's an honor, but it's also a duty. And I think, we think of commercialization as like, oh, that's the, you're making money off of that. Trust me, we haven't made any money. Someday, maybe. But really, it's about the goals that we hope to really achieve. And when I came across her technology, yes, it looked delicious, but really it was about how do we feed the world? How do we make a sustainable food system that's going to have the impact? And Davis is playing a really important role in that. And so I wanted to be engaged in that. Entrepreneurs play such a it's a tough role, but also what the academics and what the faculty and the researchers are doing are so important. But again, I think that's where our taxpayer dollars going to work is having that role. Commercialization is just one way that you can do that. Davis has extension. We teach the farmers of the world how to do this. It's a lot of other roles, but one of those mechanisms is commercialization. And if you can have a product that's going to be profitable, and it doesn't need to be wildly profitable, just enough profitable that it can extend its reach across the globe. So that's our goal, is really to make that impact and have a product that is delicious, nutritious, but sustainable means, both for the environment, but it does have to, be profitable enough that you can actually, have it commercially globally.
So trying to get that toehold in the market so it can kind of become, people can innovate and take it further. Here's an audience question that I'm pretty excited about. What would it look like to have an anaerobic digestion system at the Exploratorium? I don't know, Ray Hong, can we have one? Can I have an anaerobic digestion system?
The answer is yes. Yeah, definitely. And so we could build the digesters anywhere, distributed for Exploratorium. That would be perfect. And so, any food or scraps or even papers we throw away, we just put it into biоdigester, and then we produce methane to power the lights. That would be wonderful. Yes, I'll be happy to work with you.
Well, thank you, kind audience member. We'll look forward. We'll get right on that. And just more generally, could the Exploratorium itself, with all of our food waste from our staff and our cafe, do you think we could power an anaerobic biodigestion system, or should we? Would we have to involve the neighborhood? I mean, can these things be scaled up or down?
Yeah, depending the needs. So how many lights want to power. And so air conditioning, so basically start from there and see whether we have enough food scraps to feed the hungry bacteria. And so if not, then we can engage the communities, surrounding businesses. For example, our biodigester on campus, so we take food waste from our campus. Also, we take food processing waste from some business food processing facilities near Davis. And also, at one time, we also take a truckload of food waste from San Francisco. And so to produce the energy.
Well, that sounds exciting. And we have a lot of lights and generator type exhibits, so we probably need quite a bit of food to power them. Another question that I think is a pretty exciting one is a lot of you guys have spoken about nutrition and sort of addressing nutrition. So someone here noted that our food has become less and less nutritious. Is there a role for these types of products, these upcycled or repurposed products, to increase the nutritional content of our food?
Yes. And the reason why is because it's the same reasoning that goes into the thinking behind this question. Like a lot of our food process, if you take like a conventional flour, as an example, that takes a wheat berry, from the field and processes it by milling it and then removing the bran, which is the most nutritious part, of the wheat, right? And further refining it, sometimes it gets bleached, and it's basically nutritionally inert by the time, most commercial, industrial grade flours go to a industrial baker to make a white loaf of bread that you might see in a commercial aisle of a grocery store. The grain that has already been used to brew beer, this barley, the beer making process has naturally desugared that malt. The breweries care about the sugar. That's what powers the fermentation that then becomes the beer, right? so what's left in that barley is all protein and fiber. It's everything else, right? So it's actually, the industry calls it spent grain. We talk about it, language matters, right? We were talking about that earlier. We call it a super grain because it's been nutritionally supercharged by this brewing process, because it's all the good stuff. It's all the protein and all the fiber. So when you incorporate that into a bread at about 10%, you immediately get that bread to a good source of fiber claim. 15%, you get to a high fiber claim. That's a fortifying ingredient. That's getting more nutrition into the food. That's not going to be true of every upcycled supply chain necessarily, right? Like the syrup that we have that's made from the cacao fruit is very sweet. It's a syrup, but it all kind of depends. There's other nutritional value, functional value, of that. So yeah, I would just consider, like with conventional food, what we're removing, right, in order to make, what the status quo is, versus, what can actually be concentrated, through like a process like beer making that actually maybe is useless to the brewer after it's been gone through that process, but can become quite valuable to someone who's eating it. Almost nobody gets enough fiber in their diet. So.
That's actually a very exciting and promising application, and to think about what we're removing as we make our other food products. Here's another question from the audience. Are there policies in California that impede reducing food waste? Are there barriers, like policy barriers you've encountered? I think we've heard there's like an exciting and promising policy to help us reduce it, but what are the obstacles?
I would say there's maybe not an obstacle, but a little bit of tension between some of our food safety laws and recovering some of these materials that we didn't treat as food safe before. So I think that's more, it's not really an obstacle, it's an education that you have to have if you're an entrepreneur and you're asking for this ingredient that used to be a waste. Now that ingredient has to be treated as an ingredient, and you have to have that sort of supply chain understanding and verification to make sure that what you have has been treated as food safe throughout the process. Sometimes that requires additional investment. It's not for free, and it requires investment in infrastructure and education to make that happen. So that is conversations we have had, that none of this stuff happens instantaneously. We have to sort of get the policies in place, and we have to understand how to work with those policies to make these innovations happen.
That's great, and that sort of ties back to how do we talk about these products. I have a couple more questions to wrap up. So I think you all have an element of coaching or teaching in your work. Rui-Hong and Ned, you're professors. You teach students every day. Dan and Zane, you're working with entrepreneurs, either sort of newly minted entrepreneurs or companies that are interested in doing what you've done with Regrained in their own company. So what are the skills you're teaching? What are the skills people need to tackle wicked problems as they're in their workplaces or in their education? Like what skills are we trying to see in the public if we want to tackle a challenge at the scale of food waste?
So I might just mention two things briefly. One, I think it's very important to look at food as a food system. And so we try to teach that in our classes. Certainly if I'm talking about the relationship between food and the environment, we have to understand all the inputs that are required to grow food: fertilizer, energy, water, et cetera. We have to think about how we move food from one place to another and what's required to make sure it's safe and high quality when it's delivered to the consumer. That's really a systems approach, and we don't always teach systems approaches to understanding societal problems, and I think that's a really important piece of education we have to provide. The other piece I say we do well in Davis, especially in our food science program, is we do a lot of hands-on education, meaning the students get to play around with ingredients and make new food products. So we've had upcycled food ingredient challenges on campus, and I've never seen the students get more excited with this topic, because it's a real challenge. They have to put their food science hat on and say, oh, this tastes different. How do I either use that flavor or mask that flavor to bring this into the product? It changes the texture of this bread that I'm making, so how do I adjust my recipe to match this new ingredient? And they're understanding the narrative behind it, that there's a story behind using these new ingredients, and they love to tell that story. In fact, a group of students that we've worked with on campus won a business competition on campus that won $10,000 for coming up with one of these products that was really innovative. And sure enough, the next 3 years were food upcycled products at the business school that won the award. So it's really, it catches on. The narrative is interesting, it's innovative and exciting.
Test it. There we go. Let me just add to that, because I'm biased, and you touched on the entrepreneurship, because I think that's really important in at least for me in that translation. And really, what I see is my role in Optimized Foods is really taking Rui-Hong students and helping them cultivate that inner entrepreneur. And so she's got some great grad students that are now in our company. They are really the ones translating that technology, and now they're learning how to pitch the technology and how to go out and raise capital. And so for me, it's building those entrepreneurs who want to take that technology and have it make an impact. And I'm looking in the audience, and I see a bunch of actually budding entrepreneurs here. Ray Hung, I don't know if you saw her other technology. She had the algae kind of stuff on the spoon. I would have loved to have commercialized that technology. I just don't have enough time. It's the most amazing. It's algae butter. Forget avocado toast. This is algae toast, the healthiest thing you could possibly imagine. Tastes amazing. Just need somebody to help her commercialize it. I wish I had the time, but anyways, think about it. Algae toast. Amazing. So anyways, there's other technologies out there as well, but it's finding that passion. Entrepreneurship isn't necessarily about making companies. It's about finding something you're passionate about and doing whatever it takes to get it out there.
So if you see yourself as a budding algae toast entrepreneur, call Zane. And then our final question here is, we all play different roles. Sometimes we're voters or consumers. Sometimes we're, fired up enough to write a congressperson. So what are some things that people should know as they engage with the space? If you have in your daily life or in your public life, what should people in this audience know or do to improve the efficacy of our food system?
I got one. Somewhere between 30 and 40% of food waste happens at home. So all these industrial solutions are also really, really important, and you should support all the budding entrepreneurs who are trying to solve them. But also just think about what you are doing at home. The can of tomato paste that you opened to make dinner and only used half of. Are you freezing the other half? The freezer's a pause button, right? Are you storing herbs in a little bit of water in the fridge so they stay, fresh and lively? Are you letting them get sad and wilt in the back corner and then get tossed away, right? So there's just so many things that we can be doing at home. Meal planning, it's also good for your budget, right? That will actually make a meaningful impact on your own personal contribution to food waste that in aggregate is a huge part of the problem to solve.
Does anyone else have any other thoughts about what people can do as they're sort of moving through the world?
Yeah, I wanted to add, Dan made a good point. So zero waste at homes. And my bacterial microbes will not feel bad if you don't have any food scraps, okay? And on the farms, there's so much byproducts. And so now we could use in large quantity. And so, for example, for every pound of almonds we eat, there are 2 pounds of almond hulls we produced on the farm. And so most of them is a kind of low value cattle feed or just and disposed. So, and it has a 40% sugar, and a lot of nutrients in there. We collect those and feed those to the fungi and to the bacteria to produce and valuable products. So there's start with the homes. And so now certainly, and we use applied technologies for converting the byproducts. Think about besides our food, and there are a lot of byproducts we could use for producing the food or feed or energy. Yep.
I would just echo Dan's comment too, what we can do at home. And I encourage you to be inspired by my graduate students that see this as a culinary challenge, right? Like, look at what you have in your fridge, see if you can come up with something interesting. I've succeeded and failed at that in the past. You can ask my kids. I end up eating the ones that don't turn out great. But it is a kind of a fun challenge to try to think about different recipes that you might be able to put together. And I also think it's a great sort of home ec teaching opportunity with your kids or with other members of your household or roommates about how to kind of think about meal planning, increasing your culinary creativity and figuring out how to manage your ingredients well.
And I'll just add real quick, I think keep doing what you're doing, because California is really leading the way, and voting with your pocketbook and buying brands, products that are really changing consumer packaged good companies, big companies like Kraft and Heinz and ConAgra. their sustainability groups are really changing their entire practice. That's where most of our conversations are with their sustainability groups, because they realize they have to reduce their waste, and that's coming from consumers, and it only comes from consumers. It's not their shareholders. That consumer-driven response, thinking about the products that we buy, buying sustainable products is really key. Keep it up.
I think I'd also add, y'all are here tonight. You're spending an hour on a Thursday night, which is still a prime going out night, talking about, food waste, which, some people would find an unexciting or even gross issue. So I think that taking the time to get really deeply educated about these issues and understand the sort of the specifics of the problem and the granular details is actually huge. I think, you should all give yourselves a round of applause for coming already. You're already ahead of many, many folks out there. Sam, do we have time for one more question, perhaps an audience question, or are we about at the limit? I think, do you have an audience question you would share? No. Well, then I'll take my last question, which is something I love to ask people who are deep thinkers in their field. Who is writing about either food waste or food systems or other wicked problems, or who is creating media about them that you think is exciting? Who do you enjoy learning from yourselves?
So there's a wonderful resource that really pulls together a lot of data and insights on food loss and waste in the US. It's called ReFed. So if you go to refed.org, it's an incredible resource. They have an annual summit every year where they bring a bunch of solution providers together, talk about different updates to the data, what the situation looks like, and they've done a tremendous job. I mean, it's really an amazing resource. I use it in my class all the time, or to get my students going on thinking about, what are some of the challenges or amounts of waste they're looking at across the food supply chain. And another just kind of more, popular media is Civil Eats is a great resource to read fantastic articles about the food system. So those would be my two recommendations.
Also, Food Tank is a good one. Danielle Nierenberg does some really great work on this. And then the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, if you're unfamiliar with that, go check out that resource as well. They've been doing a lot of work around nature-positive foods and looking holistically at the food system, which we've talked about tonight. Tonight we've mostly been focused on what happens with the food that we've already produced, but a really important part of that puzzle is also how we are producing that food in the first place, right? And farming to improve soil health, and all the decisions that go into how we're cultivating food in the first place. And it's all a part of the same system, and I think Ellen MacArthur Foundation is really leading the way in a lot of that writing.
Good Food Institute is one that I spend a lot of time on. Same, they're looking at supply chains and agri-food waste, and so, yeah, Good Food Institute is a resource that I highly recommend.
Outlet or writer that you turn to when you're trying to get a little inspiration and thinking about the sort of bigger picture?
Yeah, I don't have a particular one, but I have enjoyed really working with the science writers like yourself. Yeah, and just the one article just came out this morning in the National Geography, reporting my research and turning food waste into biodegradable plastics. New York Times, and I had the article 2 weeks ago, or 2 to 3 weeks ago, and I just had the great honor to work with the science writers. Thank you.
So watch for more coverage from these folks as well about their own research. And Sam, how are we on time? Should we look at wrapping? Yeah. Well, I think that I feel like that's an inspiring note to end on. So I just want to thank you all for being here and thank our wonderful panelists. If you wouldn't mind giving them one more round of applause.